invited a guy over after a wild night out. My husband walked in while we were laughing on the sofa. The first step to misery is freedom. I realized that after I had messed up my marriage. I don't even know how to explain this. All I know is that if my husband didn't give me the go-ahead to do what I did, all of this wouldn't have happened. I blame him truly, but now he wants to shift all the blame on me, when I was only doing as he desired. Maybe I went too far when I invited a guy over to the house, but that's because I thought I had his support. Most of you are going to say I'm delusional, but I am not. Because if my husband had told me no, you're not allowed to have fun, tell me why I would do all the things I did. For context, my husband Francis is a very supportive husband, and he never declined my offer or request, and he was always there to make sure I have a great time, while I, on the other hand, am a very hardworking career woman. Most people address me as a workaholic because I love working, and I really loved my work. I have been working for years, and I have never really seen the need to quit or slow down and even take a break until one day, and I crumpled it up. Now, I wish my husband wasn't so supportive then. Maybe I wouldn't have ended up the way I did. This all began the day I felt like I was working too hard, more than my body could handle. My husband had always suggested that I should take a break from work, but I never actually saw the need to. I really loved my job, and I wanted to be present every day, doing what I love. Although I really wanted to give in to that suggestion, I was not tired enough. Not until the day I started complaining about how exhausted I was. My husband hated it so much because it always ruined the mood. He wanted me to at least for once take a break, chill, and relax. But I kept saying no, and when I fell ill due to stress, I realized my husband was right, so I decided to go for it. I did what he asked of me, and I took a paid leave. I was grateful to him for making me see that my health was more important than my work, and that I needed to rest for a little while. On my first day off, I was still not feeling strong enough, so my husband made sure to take good care of me. He also stayed back from work and made sure I was feeling all good. He was there for me until I fully recovered a few days later. Then he told me to have fun and do all the things I'd always wanted to but never had time for. He said I still had time now, but if I didn't take it, I'd be back at work before I knew it. So I gladly jumped into accepting it, and I was ready to take advantage of my break. That was how my wild life started. I was only meant to have fun and do the things I never had the chance to do, but I found myself drifting far away, doing something worse than I could ever imagine. A friend invited me over for a party, and from there, I loved the feeling that came with it, and it shifted my personality, and I became a whole new person. It's been years since I went to one, so I loved being back there again. It made me feel so young and free, and that's when I started partying nonstop. My husband was shocked and worried. He asked me what was going on with me and if I needed any kind of comfort and support, but I told him I was fine and I wasn't partying because I was depressed or something, that this was my way of having fun and relieving stress. My husband accepted my answer, but he told me that partying too much wasn't a great idea. And maybe I should find a new way of having fun. Maybe have a spa day, yoga retreat, or learn new hobbies. I told him that I wasn't really interested in that, and I enjoyed unwinding at home some days and partying some days. Then, he said he wasn't against partying, but doing it too much was what he was totally against. And I should try to engage myself in the things he mentioned, and maybe, who knows, I might find them fun. But I got mad and told him that he was projecting his demands and way of life on me without caring about what I needed at that point. Then he told me that was not what he was doing and that I misunderstood him. So I added that was the same way he misunderstood me, and that didn't sit well with me. He apologized and told me that he didn't want the conversation to turn into a big fight. I accepted his apology, and he told me that he had an idea, which was for him to finish up the project he was handling at work that week, and then we could go on a romantic getaway. And that was a good way to spend my leave. I wasn't against his idea. I saw it as a perfect vacation plan, but then it changed the moment I met someone, Dan. So while my husband was at work trying to finish up the project he had for the week so we could take the trip together, I was busy flirting with other men. During the week that my husband was working hard trying to clear everything, he mostly came back late. So after spending the day lying at home, I would dress up in the evening and hang out in a club or bar, join parties and all that. And this careless attitude led to me having multiple one-night stands with different guys. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but then I couldn't stop. I was supposed to have fun, and I was having fun. Then one night, I met with Dan. Everything with him made a good difference from the regular one-night stand I was having. I wanted to keep him by my side and not lose him ever. He was fun to be with, a great guy with great humor, and he was so good in bed. I had the best moments with him, and that's why I stopped the one-night stands and focused on only him. I didn't even care about the fact that I was married. My husband told me that he was happy to support me as long as I was having fun, and I didn't think he would be that mad. Besides, he didn't even know what was going on with me. He was totally in the dark. The last night of him working before the day we had planned to travel, he came home earlier than me and was waiting for me. When I got home after having a good time with Dan, I saw my husband with a tight face sitting on the sofa. I asked him what was wrong, and he said everything was wrong with me. That was unexpected, so I asked him for an explanation. He said I left the house without making any food for him to come back and eat, and that I had been returning home way too late and he didn't really like it. I told him that he could have just ordered food if food was that problem, instead of making it look like I committed a crime. He then said that food wasn't his problem, but my attitude and actions were the problem. He was tired of keeping quiet because he saw how happy I was, and he thought maybe it was a good thing because it's been a long time since he had seen me so happy and bright. So he decided to shut up and let me do my thing, but I was taking it too far. I asked him what he meant by far, and if it was wrong for me to unwind, and if that isn't what he always wanted, and he said yes. He wanted me to take some time away from work because I was breaking down slowly, but he never asked me to do whatever the hell I wanted and termed it as fun. And that was how we got into a big argument that night, and I canceled our trip. I told him that I was angry, and I was scared that the trip would end up not being what I was looking forward to, because if he was bossing me around and treating me like I was trash, how much more when we are alone on a trip and I have nowhere else to go to, or no one else to turn to except for him, the same person who hurt me, and that I was deeply hurt by his words and his way of seeing things. I walked away from him that night, telling him I couldn't be with him and that I was too angry to be with him. He begged me not to leave and that we should talk about it and find a solution around it, but I was too angry, so I left. I was angry that night, that was why I left, but to be honest, the main reason was because I saw it as an opportunity to go back to Dan. I wanted him to be the one to comfort me. I wanted to be wrapped in his arms all night, and that's exactly what happened. When I got to his place, he was surprised to see me because I had just left him not long ago. I just kissed him and told him that I changed my mind because I couldn't bear spending the night without him. Dan was so happy, so we had an amazing time that night and I didn't even feel bad for it. Maybe because I was angry at my husband, and I blamed him for trying to ruin my night while another man was here making me happy. My husband was supposed to always back me up, and he always did, but I don't know what got over him that night, though I forgave him and returned home the next day. Immediately I returned home. He pulled me into a tight hug, telling me he was worried and asking where I slept and why I didn't pick up his calls. I told him that I crashed at my friend's place and that we should forget about the previous night and move ahead with our lives. He was happy, and then he asked me if we were still going for the trip and if I had truly changed my mind about it, but I told him no, that we were no longer taking that vacation and that things were a bit rocky, so we should slow down a bit with our arrangement. My husband understood me and told me that there was no problem if that's what I wanted, and he was going to wait for me until I was ready. I really appreciated his understanding, and I also tried my best to make sure not to offend him, so I started limiting my outings to strictly seeing Dan. No more parties. I even made sure to prepare food for my husband and do all the chores and only make sure to see Dan during my husband's working hours so that we won't have any hiccups. I didn't enjoy us fighting, but during all these processes, I didn't feel like myself anymore. I felt like I was restraining myself from having the freedom to do anything I wanted. The main reason why I took a break from work was to make sure I enjoyed things I never had the chance to while relieving myself of stress. And the thing I wanted then was to be with Dan always and go on all kinds of dates with him, and not doing that because I wanted to please my husband made me feel like I didn't have any freedom, like I was a slave to him. I made up my mind that I wasn't going to be someone who does things just to please other people, but just for herself alone. That evening, when my husband came home, I was ready to confront him, but then, before I could do that, he told me that he was going to work overnight the next day, and he was not sure of when he would come home yet. So I shut my mouth and decided that instead of bugging him, I should use that as a chance to explore with Dan. I acted like I would miss him, and I don't even know why I did that. Maybe I wanted both my husband and Dan. Dan was just for fun, and my husband was who I was truly married to. After all the fun, it's him I'd come back home to. That's how I understood my actions. So we made love that night, and I told him how greatly he would be missed. The next day came, and my husband left for work. Despite not being sure when he would return, he had told me before leaving that he would come back the next 2 days, or maybe at night the next day. He wasn't sure when he would be done with what he was handling at work. He instructed that I could come visit him if I wanted to, and whenever I was bored, and that I was allowed to call him whenever I needed to speak to him. I told him that I would do just that, and kissed him goodbye. Surprisingly, an hour after he left, Dan called me and told me he wanted us to hang out later at night if I had the chance. I didn't even overthink it. There was nothing to overthink about, so I said yes. When night came, I put effort into my dressing, making sure I was looking good enough, so when I arrived at Dan's place, he told me that we were going for a party, and if I was okay with it, and I told him that I was okay with doing anything as long as I did it with him. Within a few minutes, he got dressed, and the next thing we knew, we found ourselves at a party. It was a crazy and wild party. A lot of crazy things were happening, and I was so carried away with all the alcoholic drinks and feelings for Dan. And the next thing, we were having an intense, intimate moment in the bathroom. Then, one of his friends asked to join, and then he asked if I was up for it, and I said yes, and that's how we ended up having a threesome. It was one of the craziest nights of my life. I don't know how I even agreed to do that, but I just knew that I was having so much fun, and decided to seek more thrill by doing something outside the ordinary. After that, we did a lot of dirty acts that I can't really disclose, but imagine the worst thing ever. Once the party was over, I was feeling very tipsy and tired. All I wanted to do was to just go home and sleep. Since Dan's place was a bit farther away from the venue than mine, I suggested that we go to my place. Dan at first refused and said he didn't want me to have any issues with my husband. I told him that my husband was busy at his workplace and wasn't coming back, so he could stay over and leave in the afternoon. He reluctantly agreed and said it's only because his place was farther away and I needed to go to bed because he knew I was drained. I was thankful, and then he drove us home. When we got there, it didn't even take up to 3 minutes before I fell asleep. When I opened my eyes, I saw Dan smiling at me. I was excited to be waking up next to him. We shared morning kisses, and then I asked him to freshen up while I made breakfast for him. He told me he couldn't stay because it was too risky, but I told him not to worry, that my husband wasn't coming back anytime soon. That if my husband was going to change his mind and come back home a bit early, he would let me know. But he didn't text me, so we were safe. I had checked my phone and saw missed calls from him. He called while I was partying, that's why I didn't notice. I told myself I'd call him back later after I was done with Dan so we could chat properly and freely without making Dan feel uncomfortable. So after I freshened up, I made breakfast for Dan and me. We had a great breakfast, and we were even intimate while at it. It was exciting, thrilling, and wild. I wasn't even the type of person to engage in such, but I saw myself being very open to it. And then I thought, maybe this break was really wanted because I needed to discover myself and the things I love to do aside from the boring stuff my husband and I had in mind when I took a break off from work. So after breakfast, we played around in the living room, made out, and did whatever we wanted. Then right after that, we lay cuddling on the sofa, naked while giggling and laughing about our crazy and lovely moments together. Then I heard a sound like something dropped, so I turned only to see my husband standing a few steps away from us. His bag was on the floor in front of him, so I guess that was what dropped from his hand out of shock. I instantly pushed Dan away while trying to cover myself up with anything I could see. The shock and anger on my husband's face were enough to destroy me. Dan quickly got up, packed his clothes, and tried to run away, but my husband held him back by punching him in the face. Dan fell to the floor, and I was utterly stunned. Then my husband started kicking him and turned him into a punching bag. I pleaded for him to stop, but he was paying no attention to me. When he was satisfied and Dan was badly beaten, he kicked him out of the door. I wanted to run and take care of him by treating his wounds, but I couldn't because I had my husband to face. He focused on me next after he was done with Dan. He told me he was so disappointed in me and that he felt so betrayed. He never expected me to be that kind of person. He was angry because he had to rush to finish up at work, because he was worried since I was not picking up my calls, only to meet me all cozy with another man. I tried to explain myself to him, but he refused to give me a listening ear. He told me that I was no longer his wife, and I don't know if that's a joke or not, because I don't even know what to think of it. I hated the way it turned out. I didn't expect that everything would crumble that way. I don't want to lose my husband. I can't. Dan was just a guy I was having fun with, while Francis, my husband, is my forever. But then, since then, he has been acting differently. I don't know what to do anymore. Update. Since my last post, I have received lots of insults and accusations. Well, I'm not saying I'm exactly innocent, but then my husband told me to have fun, and that's exactly what I was doing. Maybe I took it too far, but that doesn't mean he should act the way he did. That day when my husband walked in on me and Dan, marriage became a living hell. Francis left that day after he denied that I was no longer his wife. I didn't even know what to do, if I should go after him or Dan. I was lost in confusion. I tried contacting Dan to apologize since my husband was not picking up my calls, and I didn't know where he was exactly. But Dan's number was not connecting, and I decided to pay him a visit. When I got there, this man didn't even let me enter his house. He said that everything was my fault and that I should never contact or show up at his place again. Then he shut the door in my face, but then I banged at his door, telling him to open up and hear me out. Just then, his door opened again, and this time it wasn't him that came out. It was a girl, a rageful-looking girl. She threatened me, saying that if I didn't stop stalking her boyfriend, she was going to make sure I regretted the day I was born. So I ran for my life. I was so sad and broken. It was only just a week, and Dan had already replaced me. But I guessed that it was meant to happen after having a fleeting moment of excitement with someone that was never yours to begin with. As much as I wanted to move on, I felt deeply hurt. Then one afternoon, my husband returned home. Immediately he entered and saw me. He asked me what I was still doing in his house, and I told him that it was our house and not his, and that we were married, so everything that belonged to him was mine as well. He told me that I am an eyesore and that he feels the worst of things just looking at me, that I should get out of his sight before he loses it on me, but I didn't. Then he threw divorce papers he was holding at me. I told him that I wasn't signing the papers and that it was all his fault. He told me to have fun, but now he wants to pin everything on me, like I intentionally just took a break from work just to be sleeping with other men. I kept shouting and yelling that my cheating was just as much his fault as it was mine, and that he had no right to be angry. But he didn't say a word in response to me. He just shook his head, then went to our room, and then returned with my stuff. I asked him what he was doing, but he still didn't respond. He tried to stop him from throwing my belongings outside, but it did not work out because he is stronger than me. Once he was done with that, he carried me outside. I tried struggling, but I failed badly. I couldn't stop him, and after that, he closed his door and ignored my restless rants and pleas for mercy. And that was when I felt it, that I had lost everything and that this was all my doing. I cried bitterly. My heart was wrecked. A week later, I realized that I was pregnant. I didn't know if it was my husband's or Dan's child, but I was more sure it was Dan's because I had the most intimate moments with him during that period. But I couldn't exactly go to him and tell him that I am pregnant, and I couldn't do the same with my husband either. So here I am, all miserable and thinking of a way to pick myself up. Also, I'm still not sure if I'm keeping the baby or not, but I'm sure I'll find a way for myself.